Welcome back, everyone, to Level Headed Mind. And today we have a very special guest, Emma Hames. And she is a former teacher, now musician turned film producer, as she shares her story of benzo-induced neurological dysfunction. And so today we're going to learn about Emma and her story and how she was injured by a medication that was prescribed for anxiety. So, welcome, Emma. Welcome to the channel. And I'm very glad that you're here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here and be part of another platform that's doing amazing things. So yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, so on this channel, we talk a lot about different medications and treatments for mental health. And I have a video on benzo-induced neurological dysfunction, and there's a lot of questions surrounding this. And you actually have a lived experience. So can you walk us through when you first started the medication and how things went, and then when you realized you were in this dysfunctional state?
Yeah, so the reason I ended up on the medication was after a virus, which very weirdly, I look back and I think it was a kind of coronavirus, probably about 15 years ago. I contracted it on a teaching placement and wanting to really make sure I didn't fail my degree, I completely pushed myself, didn't rest. And as a result, the virus really took a hold of my lungs, and I didn't know it at the time. I'd find out a year later that my lung capacity was at 60% and that I had a kind of asthma that had developed at the age of 22, 23, as a result of this virus. So because I'd gone a year without breathing properly, I naturally developed anxiety as a result.
Mhm.
And during this time, I'd actually moved countries from the UK to France. And when I was there, I had a very severe panic attack as a result of this anxiety. And my dad drove me to I was on holiday with my parents at the time, and he drove me to a doctor that I'd never seen before. And he said, if you want your life back, take these, and gave me this benzodiazepine prescription, which was unbeknown to me at the time that's what it was.
Mhm.
And I think having just gone to France and finally had the answers around the lung capacity issues, I just it didn't cross my mind that this could be a highly dangerous drug, and I trusted them.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's how I ended up on a benzodiazepine.
Yeah, and so oftentimes when people are prescribed these types of medications, there's a relief, almost immediately. And so it's like this miracle drug. And so it seems like, they want to keep taking it. And so is that what you found as well? The medication worked well for you? You took it for a long time, or did you only take it for a little while?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Because I remember at the moment I was so desperate for help. I mean, the effects of the virus were really severe. All my senses, I had sensory overload. A door closing sounded like a bomb going off, and I couldn't handle bright lights. And 2 years before, I'd been playing soccer for quite a high level team in the UK, and so I couldn't understand how I'd gone from that to I can barely function. And so I just wanted there to be an answer as you would in that situation. So I was happy to think that that was another solution to the problem. Okay, they've now fixed the lung issue. Now there's this weird other thing going on, and now they've got this solution as well. But actually, although it helped in the very, very beginning, and by very beginning, I mean like day, week, maybe,
Mhm.
um, I realized probably within a few weeks, I'd have to go back and I need to go and find my notes actually and medical notes. I realized fairly early on that this wasn't something that I should be on. I felt the heaviness. I felt the potency, for want of a better phrase, felt very drugged up and drowsy. And I
Mhm.
just thought this isn't right. And so I asked to come off it, and the doctors actually refused to let me. And they increased my dosage instead. And again, it's so easy to look back with hindsight and think
Mhm.
I should have put my foot down. I should have been very um, assertive about it. But again, you're in a vulnerable situation. You're in a new country. These doctors have just saved your life on the one hand. Why would there be a reason to distrust them with this? And so I trusted in them saying that, no, we need to increase your dosage and we need to keep you on it. So I actually ended up being on it for 4 years.
Mhm.
I was on the highest dose at some point, and I then asked to, sorry, I then ended up cold turkeying after 4 years.
So it sounds to me like, Emma, that with this trust around doctors and conventional medicine, many people fall into this situation. And it seems to be surrounding a lot with the education and how conventional medicine hasn't really caught up to these effects of benzodiazepine use long term. And you mentioned that there were some clues like that something wasn't right and that you were feeling this heaviness and feeling like maybe it's too drowsy. And when you presented that to your doctors, they said, hey, actually, we probably need to increase the dose. So then you were on it for 4 years. So when you increased the dose, did you feel like it was better? Because oftentimes when those types of symptoms are happening, patients are starting to experience like a tolerance withdrawal effect. And then over time, the dose continues to get increased. Is that similarly to what happened in your case as well?
Yeah, it's quite hard to remember the specifics of how it evolved. In many ways, it just seems like that whole 4 year period just seems a little bit of a blur. I remember just getting new symptoms coming, and I now know, and I look back, and I think that was definitely tolerance withdrawal for sure.
Mhm.
Um, so I was having tachycardic events, but I didn't know what they were. Just becoming very apathetic to things, very disconnected from things. And again, at the time, it was hard to see that sort of the frog in boiling water analogy. You just don't see it, and the dial is getting turned up and turned up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really hard to know whether the increased amounts were sort of a temporary band-aid and then created larger problems down the road or not. It's really, really hard to actually ascertain as to how it unfolded at a granular level in terms of, cellular effects and biology and all
Mhm.
the science behind it. Um, but yeah, I never had any awareness of what was actually happening in terms of tolerance withdrawal, and neither did the doctors by the looks of it.
Right. Yeah. And that's unfortunate because um, the education that providers get it doesn't really include benzo-induced neurological dysfunction. In fact, that term is relatively new, thanks to a lot of grassroots movements and organizations and their research into this very important topic. And it sounds to me then at a certain point after 4 years of this, you started realizing that something was wrong. And so was that through discovery like online or was it a family member? How did you then realize like something's wrong? I need to get off this medication?
Yeah, so I mean, it kind of went into this new chapter of confusion and suffering after the 4 year mark because I ended up coming back to the UK, not being able to find the answers in France. And I just very intuitively knew that something serious was going on. I was having more tachycardic events in the middle of teaching, in the middle of drinks with friends, in the middle of the night. And so I kind of felt like I'd exhausted all avenues in France and decided to come back to the UK to get the answer and then, maybe go back once I'd sorted this out. And my first doctor's appointment back in England was when, during a 10-minute appointment, I found out that I should have been on the benzo for, I didn't know it was a benzo at that point, but
Mhm.
that anti-anxiety medication for a week maximum.
Mhm.
And it was just kind of a freight train hitting me level realization. And so
Wow.
in the same appointment, she explained to me that they didn't prescribe that specific medication in the UK, but that they could give me a sister one.
Mm.
And having just been told this information, I just didn't know who to trust or what to trust. It never crossed my mind for 1 second that a medication I was taking for anxiety could kill me. And so when she mentioned about going on a different drug, I think in my head, just having felt so cheated and so abandoned by the medical system, I just felt like I had to take it into my own hands and think I'll come off it. It might be quite painful, it might be uncomfortable, but at least I'll be free from this thing that has actually turned out to be dangerous.
Mhm.
Um, or rather not good for me to be on for 4 years. And I think what makes it really hard is I look back to that moment I think, God, my mind was so affected by being on this medication for so long that I wasn't in any capacity to make any serious decisions either. And I had no one really advocating for me. So I cold turkeyed in England, and it was absolute hell for a few months. And then I was forced to go and get a full-time job. And I went and did that, a full-time teaching job in central London. And 6 weeks into that was when I just woke up one morning and the full withdrawals, aka bind, had
Mhm.
hit, and that was February 2017. I wouldn't actually find out until 2019 that it was because of the benzodiazepine. So yeah, it was quite a long period of actually realizing what had happened.
Wow. So this whole period of time between 2017, 2019, you're severely sick. You're bedbound, right? I was reading some of that, your story. And so you going to the hospital? Were you trying to find answers? Because you said you didn't realize it until 2 years later that it was the benzo. So it was kind of like you were probably searching for answers at that point, which many people do. They find themselves at many doctors and hospitals and trying to figure out what's wrong with them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all I could do. I was too incapacitated to work, so I
Mhm.
lost my job within a month, I think. At the time, the GPs were telling me it was vitamin D deficiency, so I was having to tell my boss at school, got really severe vitamin D deficiency. I didn't realize it was this bad. And of course, that didn't go down well, and they couldn't understand how I was so ill because of vitamin D deficiency. So I lost my job. I eventually had to move out of my rental flat. Um, and I was going from pillar to post with different medical professionals. I mean, I could barely leave the house either. So every time I had to go to a GP or a hospital appointment was absolute torture. It's very difficult to describe what it was actually like. But torture is the only word in the language that I can find that comes close to what it was like. So yeah, for I think the first few months, obviously they were doing all the initial tests, and I was also going to hospital because I needed ambulances. So I was averaging an ambulance a week for the first, I can't remember how long specifically, and then it kind of went to an average of one a month. And so each time they take me into hospital, they do the main observations, and it would all come back air quotes normal.
Mhm.
And I remember one GP quite early on telling me, well, we just don't know, Emma. It's probably going to take a year, up to a year to find out what was wrong. And that blew my mind. How can it take a year to find out what's happening to a body that's requiring an ambulance so often?
Mhm.
And of course, a year came and went, and I still didn't have the answer. So yeah, that 2 year period was really, really challenging. Not just with the physical symptoms, but not understanding what was going on.
Mhm.
And it got to the point where doctors sort of said to me, "You're just going to have to accept that this is, we're not going to know, and that this is your life from now on," which was terrifying. Um, and I just couldn't understand how I'd gone from having a very full life. I traveled a lot of the world. I used to live on a boat when I was a student, played football at a fairly high level, always been very ambitious and just wanting to live a full life.
Mhm.
How I'd gone from that to my heart was doing crazy things when I was having a shower, when I was having a bath, when I was lying down, when I was sleeping, when I was awake. And that was just one of the symptoms. I mean, that was the scariest, but yeah, there were probably 20 to 40 symptoms every day in, day out for years on end, and not knowing why. So, yeah, it was my 35th ambulance crew in 2019, Jenna and Joe, Somerset Ambulance Police,
Mhm.
who visited me about 2, 3 a.m. in the morning. I'd had an episode where the room started caving in on itself, and I felt like I was falling through the floor, and yeah, it was just horrific. And so they came. And they were the first medical professionals to sit down with me for the amount of time it took to recount all of the symptoms, all of the history. And that took 2 hours. And they stayed with me. We talked it through. And I think it was Jenna that said, This this is a result of the anti-anxiety medication you were on. It's called a benzodiazepine. We've seen it in other people around Somerset. And I mean, it really took a while for that to sink in because I've been tested for everything under the sun pretty much at that point.
Right.
Um, and I just couldn't believe that this thing that I had asked doctors about directly, could it be that medication? Because the timeline kind of fits. No, 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 you would have had a 2 week withdrawal maximum from that. That actually that was the answer. So yeah, that was the beginning of the whole new chapter of awareness and understanding from that point onwards.
Yeah, that's wild, but it's a godsend that those two were there that night, to help you through and to kind of help you recount the events, but also come to that conclusion. And it sounds like there were others that were being affected, so they were able to recognize your symptoms as being this part of this bind. And bind is a newer term, but before bind, there's a term called protracted withdrawal that encompasses a lot of what bind is as well. Bind is specific to benzodiazepine medications, whereas protracted withdrawal can happen with any other types of medications. But it is long lasting, and I think that that's what a lot of the conventional providers don't understand is the fact that what we're handed in education, right? What we're told and what we have to regurgitate in medical school and for me as a psychiatric nurse practitioner is that, yeah, you're going to withdraw from these medications, but typically, about 2, maybe 4 weeks maximum, right? And so that's what they were just regurgitating back to you because that's what they know, and no one's like really digging in to figure it out and trying to think outside the box to find that the true solution. Because if they would have done a little bit of digging, they would have discovered that. But I think in the UK it's very similar to the US, where these doctors are pressed to see so many patients in a short amount of time, and so their time is very limited in what they can do outside of a visit because of that fact. So I don't want to blame the doctors because I think that they may not understand completely. And that's what, we're doing here today is educating people and what we hope to continue to do. So I'm glad that you're, sharing this very difficult story. But I want to also bring us to this point of hope because here you are now. You're still struggling. You still have some symptoms now, but obviously you're able to, produce music. You have several music videos out and film. You're in the process of producing a film and creating that, and that's on your website, Toxic TOXSICK .org. And can you tell me a little bit about that? Like, where was this turning point of hope, and then now, being a change agent, being someone who's driving this message home to people?
Yeah, I mean, I think in that time frame, it was 5 years that I spent mostly housebound, and a lot of that in the initial years was bedbound. And so you get very introspective and reflective and have all these existential sort of conversations with yourself. And I think conjoining that with the growing understanding that I had about this issue and just being absolutely floored by the reality of it. And I still am to this day, the things I'm still discovering about benzodiazepines and psychiatric meds is, yeah, astonishing. And I think it kind of clicked for me at some point that maybe I could sort of marry up um, the visions that I'd always had since I was young and the dreams that I'd always had around creativity, music, film, art, with being able to use those as vehicles to communicate this effectively. Because I think for something like this, what also really surprised me is that people have been trying to sound the alarm, and yet it didn't get through enough to the medical system and to the people who are the gatekeepers of these drugs, and the people that should be safeguarding, and the general public's knowledge, because I didn't know, no one around me knew. People I talk to today, they're still shocked to hear it's happening. And so I think it just felt like the perfect synergy of needing to do something with this and needing to feel a sense of purpose again in my life. I was just so exhausted from feeling derailed from life, and I thought maybe I can do something useful and something that I can actually enjoy and will be cathartic and yeah, kind of tick all the boxes all in one go. So that's initially where the idea for a film came about, and then I developed that into what is now Toxic.
That's amazing. And also with your art, with its music, writing, you write a lot of it looks like, poetry or music. And then of course the film, but also with you have paintings that you do. So you're also doing that as well. And with this movement, obviously, it's hard to push through the film industry, and it's hard to kind of make this type of documentary mainstream. And it costs a lot of, obviously money and funding in order to do this. So on that website, you have a place for donations. You have a place where people can buy prints of your artwork. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the art collection is actually being launched next week. Unfortunately, there was a bit of a delay because I am still dealing with bind recovery, and one of the most ongoing symptoms is insomnia and sleep deprivation. So that then impacts your immune system and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I've had to sort of reel in the ambition to get the painting done by a certain time, but almost there. So that should be released next week, which we will post about on the website and on our socials, which is at Toxic Film, on Instagram, X, and TikTok. And yeah, the creativity side of it just felt like a no-brainer, for want of a better phrase, because I think, in all honesty, during that time of recovery, creativity is really what I felt saved me.
Mhm.
I don't think it's too dramatic to say that music in particular probably saved my life
Yeah.
and was a big part of my personal story. In terms of when I lived in France, I was in bands and songwriting. We were doing gigs, and that was always my ultimate dream, was to see how far I could take that, and for that to be some form of career. Um, and then obviously with the bind injury hitting, I couldn't really pursue that. And then at some point, once I got enough health, I realized that I could actually still write songs and I could still paint. And that made me feel alive, and it made me reconnect with myself when I'd felt so disconnected, and that loss of identity when something this traumatic happens. So it really was a kind of lifeboat for me mentally and emotionally. And and I just feel that that's so important potentially for everybody. I think we all are creative in our own ways, even if we don't recognize that in ourselves. Um, and it's such a tool of empowerment, not to sound too cheesy, but I really, really believe that it is something that we can sovereignly manage and use as a tool to rebuild ourselves and rebuild our lives. And so that is a very significant part of the film itself, and also the story of getting the film into production. Being a first-time filmmaker, and being an independent filmmaker means that it's not the easiest thing to get something like this into production. And I'm determined to do it, determined to find a way. And if I can leverage those creative skills to help kind of bolster that finance plan, then yeah, then that's what I'm going to do. So that's where the art collection sort of comes into play. There's 9 original paintings, about 30 inches by 30 inches. They will be up for auction for 9 weeks, and then there will be small, medium, and large prints available to buy for each of those originals as well. So there's kind of a range of pricing for everyone to get involved if they would like to be. They're all limited edition, signed, numbered, and they all contribute to getting Toxic off the ground.
That's amazing. That is so amazing. And just the fact that you were able to, come out of this enough to make this movement a reality, and to be a voice in this world where currently, unfortunately, that we don't have a big voice in the medications are harming people side of things. It's still looked at as taboo and not conventional. But I think the more these types of stories are shared and your film becomes available and starts circulating, the more that we can become agents of our own medical care and just be empowered to make these types of informed decisions. And I think ultimately that's the goal, it sounds like, with all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think health sovereignty is something that I could not advocate more for, and something that I think, unfortunately, um, there's a lack of understanding that we don't necessarily have that. That by going to our doctors and kind of innately trusting, which is what in an ideal world we'd want to be able to do. But the reality is that they are just people, they are pressed for time.
Mhm.
They have a boundary of knowledge, and that doesn't often include the holistic elements, and it does often include the drug model, of which is, in my personal experience, not sufficient enough in especially with anti-anxiety medications. I don't know for other medications, but not robust enough in its testings on human beings that are then given out so readily. And so, yeah, that's one of the things that really shocks me, is realizing that these are being given out as the first port of call and not as the last. And I reflect back on my own experience, and I think I probably just needed a holiday, probably just needed a hug. Maybe I needed to reevaluate my career choice because it was stressful and I wasn't taking care of myself, and that was contributing to anxiety. Um, Probably addressing childhood traumas and all these things that you then become aware of afterwards when you're sort of forced to. Um, and so I think the health sovereignty and the holistic approach is not just important or necessary, it is potentially life and death. And I'm definitely not against the medical model. As far as I'm concerned, medicine saved my life as well. But we have to have a far greater understanding of how all these things interconnect. And there has to be empathy, compassion, leaving the ego at the door, and for these different communities to come together and work together to actually understand what is truly beneficial for each individual in the world, which is all different, and therefore for our communities and for our society. And so, yeah, that's definitely something that the film is working towards, and I personally will continue advocating for as much as possible.
And that's wonderful. And thank you for your voice in this community as well, because I think it's very impactful to get this side of and this personal view, because this story is very personal to you. And I'm sure it's not easy having to continue to recount all of the events that have occurred because they were so traumatic. But I do like that you emphasize looking back and reflecting on your life and your stressors, and perhaps there was trauma involved, because those are the things that me as a psychiatric nurse practitioner, I'm always talking to patients and clients and people on YouTube about is you must use your skills first before resorting to pills. And those skills include some things that may be difficult for many people. And that is like exploring your childhood, perhaps resolving some unresolved trauma. Maybe it's fixing or minimizing life stressors and those types of things, or setting boundaries in relationships. And those are the hard things. And unfortunately, our society is so driven to the easy fix, and we look at these pills as quick fixes. But unfortunately, you risk this potential injury that can devastate your entire life and uproot your career and everything else, by not addressing those other things. And so thank you for sharing that with us, and for bringing that back home too, because I think that point is very, very important for people to realize, because oftentimes that's not on their mind. When they're having a panic attack, they're thinking, oh, what's wrong with me? Something, and they're not thinking maybe it's all of these other things. So I think
Yeah.
bringing that up is a good point.
And if I can just speak to that briefly, because I think it is a really, really important point. And I guess two things. I never want to romanticize what happened to me, because it's very serious, and many, many people haven't made it to the other side, and we need to be able to face that reality head on. and be honest about it. I sometimes wonder if I hadn't have gone through this, which led to this path opening of a greater understanding of myself, of life, of the way society works, of the way humans function, um, and obviously that's continual learning. But if that hadn't have happened, I do wonder if I'd still be teaching and still be living in this kind of place of feeling like that's what I should be doing. And once I just do this, then I'll have appeased some mythical societal God that is looking down on you and sort of saying, congratulations, you've now done the 9 to 5 career thing, and now here's your reward. Or
Mhm.
and I think to have, and just to say that's not a comment, a religious comment at all. It was more sort of
Mhm.
about having more of a different perspective on the way that society works and how we function within that.
Mhm.
But I think similar to what Dr. Joe Dispenza says about his injury and how that led to all this awareness and everything else, that whilst he is grateful for that, if there's a way that he can pass on those lessons and that understanding to people in a preventative manner where people don't have to go through extreme trauma to find these things out, then that's kind of the best case scenario. So yeah, I fully support what you're saying as well. And I think we all have a responsibility, even if these things aren't our fault at all have a responsibility to do our research, and possibly take a step back from things if we need to, and not always go for the quick fix, because that is the society we live in, and that it's, yeah, I think any health challenge, especially mental health elements, can be a signal to ourselves to really reflect on the root cause of that. And unfortunately, in my experience and from what I've seen with other people, a pill is very rarely the solution, though I'm sure in some small cases it's needed.
Mhm. The fact that you were able to take this suffering and transform it into this movement is a testament to your strength and resilience through this all, as well. So, because a lot of people can get stuck when it comes to protracted withdrawal and benzo-induced neurological dysfunction in the woe is me, because the world is crashing down on you, and you have lost your ability to do all of the things that you used to do, and you get stuck in the past, and you could have gone the route of, man, I wish I would have continued. I wish I could have continued teaching and kept putting yourself down for the fact that you had to, lose that job, and could have just been your own burden in that case, right? But you were able to transform that suffering and say, no, wait a minute, like there are some things I can do here, and found yourself through these avenues of music and writing and art. And so I think that's just a testament to your resilience and strength through all of this. But also what I see in practice, working with clients suffering through similar situations, is that it's like being molded, with this pain and suffering. There's like this molding process that's happening similar to clay, and then you have to put it in the fire in the kiln, to make this beautiful object, right? and
Mm.
and to make it shine and look beautiful, and it goes through this entire process, and that molding part is the suffering. So oftentimes, like you said, you don't want to romanticize it or make it seem like this is a great thing, because it certainly isn't. I've seen so many people suffer, and unfortunately, there have been people who have ended their lives because of the amount of suffering that this entails. But the fact that you're able to take that and turn it into something beautiful in the end is very commendable. And I just want to say that you're doing a great thing, and that I hope other people who are suffering can see a glimmer of hope in that, and that they can find something that maybe that's deep down in their soul. Maybe there is some creative piece, or there is something else that they can use to kind of fuel their energy, their motivation to get their life back.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for everything you've just said. And that's that was kind of the original um, embryo of motivation for the film was,
Mm.
can I make a film of hope? Because that's what's needed. And I think that extends beyond just the community of people harmed by benzodiazepines and psychiatric meds. I think we're living in really extraordinary times with the way things are progressing in technological ways, and how I think a lot of the things that we need for our well-being are kind of getting squeezed out. So I think the need for mental health discussions, safer mental health practices, and stories and learnings and sharings of hope are so incredibly needed right now. Yeah, the sort of the transformative element of it and the lessons learned, they really are there to be had. And I say that for anyone listening who just feels like, well, she might have done it, but I don't even know where to start, and that seems too far. It really is there, and I have to really emphasize that this was not an overnight journey for me. This was a lot of very deep suffering, hanging on by a thread at times, but that there is always that little bit of hope. And it's quite extraordinary how life can change from one extreme to the other on in both capacities.
Mhm.
And yeah, obviously there's so much we could say about that, and I hope I get to sort of dive more into that with the film and talking about the film as I go. But yeah, hope is extremely important, and I hope that this message and sharing this story can reinforce to anyone that is really struggling with this kind of injury, or any kind of challenge, that you can absolutely be at rock bottom, but it's not permanent.
That's right. Thank you for emphasizing that, because there are people in deep into this that think that there's no healing, and they believe they're the ones who won't heal. But there is healing in this journey, as you have shown. Even though it took so many years, you're able to reach this point, and are still in the process of healing, right? I think healing in general from everyday stressors and mental health issues is an ongoing process, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. But
yeah.
I also very strongly feel that there is the potential for a really beautiful life ahead. And I've already started experiencing that at the more I've come out of the darkest moments of it, and getting to relearn how to live life, and experiencing life again. And I think it's kind of the way the universe works, right? You can have these opposite and equal reactions to things. And so I kept that in mind as well, and just kept thinking, if I've gone to the absolute depths of human suffering and survived it, is there the chance of an equal and opposite reaction in terms of gratitude and enjoyment and appreciation of life? And maybe what might have been scary before this, starting a business or launching a film or putting my music out there, which is now another step next with the film progress. That those things might have felt terrifying to the point where I wouldn't have done them before. But when you've gone through something like this, you kind of pick up an arsenal of skills that actually potentially open up a whole new uh, life the other side. And that can be really hard to see when you're in the thick of it. But again, it's kind of there waiting for you. Just got to keep moving one day at a time, and just keep holding on to that hope, keep reading stories, learning about stories of healing, and yeah, allow yourself to feel some excitement for the possibilities of what can be, because I truly believe that actually starts to change your internal chemistry as well. The sort of rebuilding the neural pathways, and we
Mhm.
all know about the power of hope and positive mindset without being toxic positivity.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that can be very healing. Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, holding on to hope and just changing your thought process about the situation itself. Very, very healing. Lots of research on the power of the mind and our mindset, and how we can change our own biology, just by thinking of a situation in a more positive light, glass, half full versus glass half empty. So it's not that you're sort of gaslighting the situation, but you're seeing it in a different light, and the protracted withdrawal and benzo induced neurological dysfunction and injury type space. It's being able to see, yes, I'm injured, but through this process, there is hope on the other side. And there are many ways that I can, be a part of this movement, for instance,
Yeah.
and be able to be a voice in this, because we need more people to share their stories, and we need more people to come out and explain what's happened to them and be part of the solution to all of
Yeah,
this.
absolutely. Because this is still very much an issue, and we know that the mental health crisis is continuing to exponentially increase. And so this awareness is potentially life-saving, not just for those that have been injured by pharmaceuticals, but those that are potentially going to be prescribed them in the future.
Mm.
And yeah, I think it really does unlock a conversation around what is true health, happiness, and well-being in this modern society and this modern world that we live in. So yeah, no, I really appreciate being able to talk about it. And I hope even if it helps one person listening, then it's absolutely worth it. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for your time and for being here. And I'll make sure to put your links down in the description. So anyone who's interested in supporting Toxic, that's TOXSICK .org. The link will be in the description. And you mentioned you have a TikTok, X, and Twitch accounts, or is
Instagram,
that
sorry.
or Instagram? So we'll make sure to put those down in the description as well if you want to follow her and support her in her social media, because I think that as whatever you can do to spread the word is definitely going to be a benefit in this entire project, but also in this whole topic of protracted withdrawal and benzo-induced neurological dysfunction. So thank you so much for being here. Is there anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Well, again, thank you. And yeah, I think just really reiterating the last point that no matter where you're at in your journey and how disorientating and dark it can feel, um, there is always that light, the other side. And I think I liken it to sort of feeling like you're in a tunnel that has no exits, but actually if you could just step outside the tunnel, you see all this beautiful countryside around. It's just right now you're in the tunnel and you can't see it. So um yeah, just keep holding on to hope and allow yourself to dream, I think would be my message to anyone watching this.
Thank you so much. That's a really good note to leave on, a note of hope, and making sure that you're holding on to whatever dream it is that maybe you had let go because of your injury. Thank you so much for
Thank
sharing
you.
that, and thank you everyone for watching and listening to this interview. And make sure you're subscribed and that you like this video. And hopefully, we'll be able to see you in our next one next time. Take care. Bye bye.